The phone had just clicked off, but my son's cold voice was still ringing in my ears. He was demanding I pay him rent for my own home and telling me I needed to sell the bakery, the one legacy his father ever left me. In the background, I could hear my daughter-in-law's faint, dismissive laugh. "You should be grateful we're looking after everything, Mother. My name is Alice. I'm a 72-year-old retired history teacher from the small town of Maple Creek, Vermont. And that was the moment I realized that what I had spent my whole life calling love had actually become an invisible cage. This is the story of how I found my freedom again. If you've ever felt taken for granted or unheard in your own family, well, maybe this story is for you. You see, I'm Alice, a retired history teacher. My whole life has been steeped in the stories of the past, of empires that rose and fell, of revolutions that began with a single whisper. I taught my students that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's the story of people, of the small choices that lead to enormous consequences. But I never imagined that the greatest revolution of my own life, this quiet war to win back myself, would begin on an ordinary Tuesday morning, amidst the smell of cinnamon and toasted bread. Unlike my quiet house at the end of Oak Street, a place that holds memories, the bakery, John's Hearth, was another world entirely. It was my husband's noisy, warm legacy, a place always buzzing with laughter, the whir of the coffee grinder, and the constant jingle of the bell on the door. Even though I rented it out to a lovely young woman, Mary, and her husband, I still came in almost every day. I didn't come to manage, but to live inside that legacy. I loved the feeling of flour dusting my hands, loved watching the little kids press their faces against the glass display case, their eyes wide as they stared at pastries that glittered like jewels. This place was the beating heart of my memory of John, and it was my joy. It was proof of a life lived to the fullest. On that fateful morning, the bakery was in the middle of its morning rush. The air was thick with the smell of freshly roasted coffee and melting butter. I was busy behind the counter, my hands moving quickly, wrapping up warm croissants for Mr. Peterson while still chatting with Mrs. Miller about her new strawberry jam recipe. Everything was a flurry of happy, bustling life. This was my world, a world of small things, of connections, of familiar smiles. Then, the phone in my apron pocket buzzed. I glanced down at the screen and saw Stephen light up next to his smiling picture. My heart warmed up a little. Maybe he was calling to ask if I needed anything from the grocery store on his way home from work, or to tell me about the positive voter reactions from his speech on education last night. Stephen was always like that, always knew how to share his successes with me. "Emily, could you watch the counter for a moment, dear?" I said to the young girl working with me. She smiled and nodded. I stepped into the small office in the back, a cramped room just big enough for an old desk and a few boxes of paperwork. The cheerful noise of the bakery faded, replaced by the low hum of the old refrigerator, a sound as familiar as my own breathing. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and answered the call. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice still carrying the cheerfulness from out front. "Hello, Mother." Stephen's voice came through the line, but something was different. It didn't have its usual warmth, none of the excitement of a son sharing good news. It was flat, with a cold distance to it, like a bank manager calling to deliver some unpleasant information. "I'm calling because there's something we need to clear up." The smile on my face vanished. All the warmth in that little room seemed to get sucked right out. "What is it, son?" "Brenda and I have been reviewing the expenses," he said, and I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his bright campaign office, swiping a finger across his tablet, his eyes focused on nothing in particular. The cost of home maintenance, property taxes, insurance, everything's gone up. "We think it's time you started contributing your share." I was stunned. I felt my whole body go stiff. "Contributing? I pay for all the utilities and my own personal bills. I don't understand." "Not those things, Mom," he said, a note of impatience in his voice now, as if he were explaining a complex problem to a slow child. "I'm talking about the bigger costs. The costs to maintain that house. We were thinking a reasonable rent would be the fairest solution." Rent. The word just hung there in the air between us, as cold and sharp as a shard of broken glass. It dropped into the silence in my head and shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one cutting into a memory. Rent. In the very house that John and I had poured our sweat and love into building, in the room where I had rocked him to sleep 1,000 nights, in the garden where his father had taught him how to plant an apple tree. "Rent?" I asked again, my voice a disbelieving whisper. I had to be sure I hadn't misheard, that this wasn't some kind of terrible joke. "Stephen, what are you talking about? It's my home, our home. Legally, our names are on the deed as well, to make managing the estate easier down the line," he replied smoothly, his words carefully chosen, like a politician answering a tough question. "Mom, let's be realistic. Everything comes down to money. The campaign is expensive, far more than we budgeted for. The house is an asset, and every asset needs to generate value. You paying a reasonable rent would help us balance the budget. It's a responsible business decision." I could hear Brenda chime in from the background, her voice syrupy sweet, but every word felt like a twisting knife. "That's right, Mother. We've run the numbers. That amount would save the campaign a significant amount. Every contribution matters right now. Think of it as investing in your son's future and the future of this town." Investing. They called squeezing money out of their elderly mother investing. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, the bitter taste of a cruel truth. "I will not pay rent in my own home," I said, and I was surprised to hear my voice tremble with anger, not fear. "The answer is no." And then, Stephen delivered the final blow, a threat disguised as reason, his voice as cold as ice. "I hope you'll reconsider. This isn't a suggestion. We need your cooperation. The bill for the first month's rent will be sent on the 1st. Click. He hung up. No goodbye, no talk to you later. Just the cold, final end of a transaction. I stood there, my hand still clutching the silent phone. The happy, bustling noise from the bakery seemed to be coming from another world, another planet that I no longer belonged to. In this small room, there was only a dead silence and the hum of the old refrigerator. I was rooted to the spot, just staring at the blank wall in front of me. Rent, bill, cooperation. The words swirled in my head, meaningless and cruel. They felt like parasites, eating away at all my beautiful memories of my family. "Mrs. Alice, are you all right?" Emily's worried voice pulled me out of my trance. She must have come in without me noticing. The door was ajar, and the light and sound of life from outside poured in, highlighting the coldness of this little room. I turned around, trying to force a smile, but my face felt stiff, like a mask. "I'm fine, dear. I raised my hand to smooth my hair, an old habit to compose myself, and my fingers brushed against something wet on my cheek. I froze. A tear. It had rolled down my face without me even knowing. A single, silent tear for a loss I couldn't even name. Standing there, surrounded by the sweet smell of the legacy my husband had left me, I finally understood the bitter truth. And then, like a film playing in slow motion, like a historian flipping through old documents to find the cause of a disaster, I started to remember. It hadn't started with a threat. No, it always starts so much more subtly. It started with kindness, with a helping hand. It started about 2 years ago, after I came down with a bad case of the flu. That flu had knocked me off my feet for 2 solid weeks. I was tired, weak, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt all 70 of my years. Stephen and Brenda were so concerned, taking turns bringing me soup and tidying up the house. "Mom, what if something happens?" Brenda had said one afternoon, holding my thin hand in hers. Her voice was filled with what sounded like genuine care. "We live so far away, we can't always get here right away. We need to have access to your accounts to pay bills in an emergency, to make sure the lights stay on." It sounded so sensible. I was tired of worrying. The idea of someone else shouldering the burden was tempting, a reasonable precaution. The next week, when I was feeling better, I went to the bank with Brenda. I signed the paper that added her name as an authorized user. The young bank teller smiled at us. "It's so wonderful to see children looking after their parents like this." I had smiled back. That was the first brick in the wall of my prison. Next came the joint credit card. "Just for convenience, Mom," Brenda explained over dinner one night. "Technology has come so far. Online shopping is so much easier. You can just use this card for any big purchases, and at the end of the month, I'll tally it up and pay it from your account. It's safer than you keeping a lot of cash in the house." The shiny plastic card arrived in the mail, with both our names on it. It felt like a gift, a modern convenience. I didn't realize it was another link in the chain that was slowly being wrapped around me. And then came the final blow. It was Christmas morning, surrounded by glittering wrapping paper and the sound of my granddaughter Lucy's laughter. Brenda handed me a folder of documents, bound in a handsome leather portfolio. "This is just a formality, Mom," she said, her smile bright and reassuring. "Power of attorney. It will just allow us to handle the more complicated financial things on your behalf, like taxes or the investment funds Dad left. The lawyer said this will make everything much simpler as you get older." Stephen sat right beside me, nodding in agreement, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It only takes effect if you ever really need it. It's just a precaution, Mom. We love you and we only want what's best for you." I hesitated for a moment. A history teacher like me knows the power of a signature. A signature can start a war or end an empire, but I looked at my son's face, my pride and joy. I looked at the smile of my daughter-in-law, the woman I used to brag to my friends about, calling her the daughter I never had. Love, I suppose, makes you blind. It makes you foolish. And so I signed. Under the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree, I signed away the control of my own life, and I did it believing it was an act of love. Now, standing in that little office in the bakery, the tear long dry on my cheek, I saw all of those helpful gestures for what they were. They weren't individual acts of kindness. They were carefully calculated steps in a campaign to take over. They didn't rob me. No, they simply made me willingly hand everything over, piece by piece, until I had nothing left but a name on a rent bill. The chill from that morning phone call seemed to have settled deep in my bones for the rest of the day. I tried to go back to work in the bakery, tried to smile at the customers, but my smile felt stiff and forced. The familiar smell of baking bread, a scent that had always brought me such comfort, now seemed unable to warm the ice that was spreading through my chest. Emily, the young woman who worked for me, kept glancing at me with worried eyes, but she was kind enough not to ask any questions. I went home in the afternoon and the house greeted me with a heavy silence. I wandered from room to room, my fingers brushing against familiar objects, John's old armchair, my collection of history books, the family photos on the wall. Everything seemed to be covered in a fine dust of deceit. Stephen's campaign poster on the refrigerator now looked like a mockery. A future built on family values. Those hollow words echoed in my head with a bitter irony. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for the rent bill to arrive, but I also didn't know what to do. A direct confrontation? Stephen and Brenda had already built the perfect narrative of a forgetful old mother who needed to be taken care of. Any public protest from me would only reinforce that story, turning me into a crazy, ungrateful old woman. I felt trapped, stripped even of the right to my own righteous anger. The second phone call came at the end of the week, after several days of tense silence. I had braced myself. This time, Stephen's tone was more conciliatory, a clear change in tactics. "Mom," he began, his voice as soft as if he were soothing a child. "I think we got off on the wrong foot the other day. Brenda and I are just worried about you, worried about the future of this whole family. Let's not talk about the rent anymore." I was wary. A wolf doesn't change its coat overnight. "Then what do you want to talk about?" "The future," he said, his voice now full of the passion he used at his rallies. "The future of Maple Creek. I have a big plan, Mom. A project that will change the face of our town, bring it into the 21st century. The Maple Creek Downtown Revitalization Project. We're going to build a new town square, modern shops, a bustling pedestrian area. It will bring new life to this place, create jobs." I listened without saying a word. I knew my son. He always had grand ambitions, big plans. Sometimes I wondered if he could still see the small people within those plans. "And," he continued, his voice filled with a carefully calculated excitement, "the location of our old family bakery, it's the key. It's the prime piece of real estate right in the heart of the project. Mom, I need you to sell it." My chest tightened. A pain, even worse than the demand for rent, shot through me. The bakery. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was where John had proposed to me, right there on the flour-dusted floor. It was where Stephen and his sister Lily had spent their childhoods, sneaking, frosting, and sugar. After John passed, I rented it to a young couple for a fair price, just to keep the lights on, to keep the place filled with warmth and laughter. It was a living legacy, a sacred relic. No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I will not sell the bakery. Not ever." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his impatient sigh, a sound I knew well from every time I hadn't agreed with one of his plans. "You don't understand, Mom. This isn't just about money. This is an act for the community. It's the perfect political move. Just imagine. Brenda has already come up with a brilliant slogan. We'll announce, 'The mayoral candidate's family leads the way, sacrificing personal assets for the town's growth.' We'll be an example. Everyone will see how much we truly care about Maple Creek. It will guarantee my win." I felt sick to my stomach. He was talking about turning the memory of his father and me into a cheap PR stunt. He didn't see a bakery. He saw a stepping stone for his political career. He was willing to bulldoze his past to build his future. My answer is still no, Stephen. Your father poured his heart into that place. This time, his voice turned ice cold, all pretense gone. "I was hoping you'd be more reasonable. Brenda said you'd be like this." It was a veiled threat, a reminder that I was up against both of them. "Think about it carefully, Mom. Don't let old stubborn ideas get in the way of the future of this family and this entire town. I'm giving you a chance to be a part of something great. Don't make me act without your consent." He hung up, and I knew. War had officially been declared. The ruthless campaign began almost immediately. They weren't direct. They were smart politicians. They worked through whispers, through hints, through rumors planted with surgical precision. A few days later, my neighbor, Mrs. Miller, stopped by the fence while I was weeding my garden. "Hello, Alice," she said, her voice a little hesitant, her eyes avoiding mine. "I ran into Brenda at the market yesterday. She mentioned you've been a bit forgetful lately. She seems so worried about your health." I straightened up, dirt still on my gardening gloves. I looked right at Martha Miller, a woman I had known for over 40 years. "Is that so? My memory seems fine to me, Martha. Perhaps Brenda is mistaken, or perhaps she wanted you to think so." Mrs. Miller blinked, a little flustered by my directness, but a chill went down my spine. They were planting the seeds. They were painting the portrait of a senile, unreliable old woman. Then, at a community meeting about the revitalization project that Stephen was hosting, a citizen stood up and asked about the obstacles in clearing the land. I wasn't there, but Mr. Peterson from the grocery store recounted every word to me the next morning, his voice full of concern. Stephen had stood at the podium, looking so distinguished and trustworthy in his suit. He sighed, a dramatic, thoughtful sigh, and looked out over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest challenge to progress sometimes comes from the very people we love. Sometimes old memories and attachments can unintentionally become roadblocks to a better future for everyone. There are some who can't see past their own little garden to the forest that's waiting to grow." He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. In a small town like Maple Creek, where John's Bakery was an institution, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. He was turning me into the villain of his story, a selfish old woman holding back the town's progress for her own sentimental reasons. The final attack, the most vicious one, was aimed directly at the heart of my legacy. On a Tuesday morning, Mary, the young woman who rented the bakery, called me, her voice frantic and choked with sobs. "Mrs. Alice, the health inspector just showed up. They said they received an anonymous tip about sanitation issues. They're tearing the whole place apart. They said they might have to shut us down." My heart stopped. I knew Mary kept that bakery spotlessly clean. She was even more meticulous than I was. This wasn't a routine inspection. This was a targeted attack. I rushed over. The scene was chaos. Two grim-faced health officials were walking around with clipboards, scrutinizing every corner of the kitchen. Mary and her husband stood there, the color drained from their faces. Curious customers were peering in from the street. The bakery's reputation was being destroyed in broad daylight. In the end, they found nothing serious, just a few minor infractions, a box that wasn't properly labeled, a tiny crack in a floor tile, things that, on a normal inspection, would have earned a simple warning. But this time, with an anonymous tip on record, they issued a notice of temporary closure for 48 hours to fully rectify the issues. 2 days. In the world of small business, a 2-day closure can be a death sentence. The news spread like wildfire. Old Alice's bakery shut down for health code violations. People started to whisper. Doubt, once it's planted, grows fast. Even after the bakery reopened, business was noticeably slower. People would walk by, glancing in with hesitant eyes. My legacy, the reputation John and I had built on honesty and good flour, was being stained by a vicious lie. That night, I sat alone in the dark, without any lights on. The grief and rage churned inside me, hot and bitter. This was no longer about money or a house. This was total war. Stephen and Brenda didn't just want to control my assets, they wanted to destroy my reputation, to erase my legacy, so they could build their future on the ashes. They wanted to reduce me to nothing, a confused old woman nobody would believe, so that when they made their final move, no one would be on my side. But they had underestimated a history teacher. They had underestimated the resilience of a woman who had buried the love of her life and gone back to work 3 weeks later for the sake of her children. They had started a war with someone who had nothing left to lose but herself. I stood up and turned on a lamp. The light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows. I walked over to John's old desk, where I kept all the important papers. I pulled out a file. Bank records, property deeds, a copy of John's will. It was time to stop relying on memory and love. It was time to rely on the facts, written in black and white. The feeling of betrayal is like an acid. It eats away at your trust slowly, leaving behind scars that no one else can see. In the days after the incident at the bakery, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every unknown phone call, every car that slowed down in front of my house made me jump. I had become a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by happy memories that were now tinged with bitterness. I knew I couldn't fight this war alone. Stephen and Brenda had built a fortress of lies and polished public images. I was just one old woman. Any direct accusation from me would be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused mind. I needed an ally, someone who would not only believe me, but who could give me the tools I didn't have. But who? Most of my friends were my age. They could offer sympathy, but not legal strength. And then, during one sleepless night, as I was flipping through old photo albums, searching for John's face, for courage in his eyes, I saw it. A picture of my granddaughter, Lucy, sitting on my lap. She was maybe 5 years old, her big, intelligent eyes staring intently at a picture book. Lucy, she was 20 now, a second-year law student at the University of Vermont. She was smart, she was sharp, and most importantly, she had a good and honest heart. But how could I pull her into this mess? How could I force her to choose between her grandmother and her own parents? The thought tormented me. But then I remembered a lesson from history. In every revolution, there are always the young people, full of ideals and a hunger for justice, who rise up against a rotten old order. Perhaps I didn't have to ask her to choose a side. I just had to show her the truth and trust her to know what was right. I decided to call Lucy on a Saturday afternoon, a time I knew she'd be least busy. I practiced what I was going to say, trying to keep my voice calm and normal. "Grandma!" Lucy's clear voice came over the line, a balm to my troubled soul. "I was just about to call you. Mom said you haven't been feeling well." My heart sank. The lie had already reached her college dorm room. "Oh, I'm fine, dear," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Just the usual aches and pains of getting older. I was calling because I had a question for you. You're studying law, aren't you? I have a little hypothetical situation for you." "Of course," Lucy replied, her voice full of curiosity. "A hypothetical sounds like fun." I took a deep breath. "Well, let's say there's an elderly woman," I began, my voice steady like I was giving a lecture. "She has a son, and she signed a power of attorney to let him manage her finances. At first, everything was fine, but then the son and his wife started using her accounts for their own personal expenses. Then they demanded she sell an important property for their own benefit. When she refused, they started spreading rumors that she was becoming senile to discredit her. Legally speaking, what are that woman's options?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. So long I thought we'd been disconnected. I could hear her soft, steady breathing. Then, Lucy's voice came back, but the cheerful lightness was gone. It was low and heavy with a grown-up seriousness. "Grandma," she said softly, "this isn't a hypothetical, is it?" The tears I had been holding back for so long finally broke free. I didn't sob. They just rolled silently down my cheeks. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "It isn't. "I knew it," Lucy said, her own voice thick with emotion. "I knew something was wrong. Mom and Dad kept talking about managing your assets, and the way they said it, it didn't sound like helping. It sounded like owning." She paused for a moment, then her voice came back, firm with resolve. "Don't you worry, I'm going to help you." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful I had to grip the edge of the table. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice still trembling. "The most important thing right now is that you have to act like nothing is wrong," Lucy explained, her voice shifting into the mode of a junior lawyer. "You have to keep playing the part of the loving, maybe slightly forgetful, mother who trusts them completely. Don't confront them. Don't let them know you suspect anything. We need time to gather evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Everything," Lucy said. "Bank statements, property deeds, and most importantly, a copy of that power of attorney document. We need to see exactly what you signed. And you need a lawyer, Grandma, a good one who specializes in elder law. I'll find one for you. Someone from outside of Maple Creek, so no one will recognize them." That phone call changed everything. It gave me a plan, a roadmap. It turned my vague fear into a to-do list. The following week, I began my silent campaign. I called Stephen and Brenda, my voice weak and a little confused. I apologized for overreacting about the bakery. "Maybe you were right." I lied, and I felt a small part of me die inside. I'm getting old, and sometimes I'm just too sentimental. They swallowed that lie, hook, line, and sinker. I could hear the smug satisfaction in Brenda's voice when she said, "It's all right, Mother. We understand. You just rest, and let us worry about everything." They thought they had won. They thought the old sheep had come back to the flock, and while their guard was down, I started to move. I went to the bank, pretending I'd misplaced some old tax papers and needed copies of my statements from the last 2 years. The young teller looked at me with a sympathetic pity. He had probably been warned by Brenda about my forgetfulness, but my request was perfectly legal, and he printed out a thick stack of papers for me. I brought them home and hid them at the bottom of my wardrobe, like forbidden treasure. That night, long after I was sure the whole world was asleep, I spread the bank statements out on my kitchen floor. Under the dim yellow light, I put on my reading glasses and began my investigation. Line by line, the small charges for groceries, the utility bills, and then the bigger ones. A payment to a luxury resort in Florida, a large cash withdrawal right before their Christmas vacation, and then a series of regular, sizable payments to a company called Green Meadow Strategies. I frowned. Green Meadow Strategies? That didn't sound like a normal household bill. I opened my old laptop, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed the name into the search bar. The result was immediate. It was a top political consulting and lobbying firm in Vermont. They were using my money to pay for Stephen's campaign. I leaned back in my chair, a chill running through my whole body. This wasn't just personal greed. This was a cold, calculated operation. They were gutting my savings to fund their ambition and dressing it up in the costume of filial duty. Just then, an email from Lucy arrived. "Grandma, I found a lawyer. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. Her office is in Burlington. She's very good and very discreet. I spoke with her briefly, and she's agreed to meet with you next week. Don't worry," I told her it was for a friend of the family. I looked at the computer screen, then at the pile of bank statements on the floor. An alliance had been formed. A plan was in motion. The first pieces of evidence were in my hands. Their perfect facade might have fooled the entire town, but it was about to come up against the hard, undeniable truth. The first meeting with Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer in Burlington, both gave me hope and plunged me into a harsh reality. She was a woman in her 50s with a neat, short haircut and eyes that could see right through you. She listened to my story without interruption, only occasionally jotting down a note in a legal pad. She reviewed the statements I brought, her eyebrows knitting together slightly, when she saw the name Green Meadow Strategies. "They're bold," Mrs. Jenkins concluded after I'd finished, her voice holding no pity, only professional analysis. "They're building a public narrative that you're not in your right mind, so that when they make a bigger move like filing for guardianship, for example, the whole town will nod in agreement. Our legal case is strong, Mrs. Waterford, but a court battle will be messy. They won't hesitate to drag your personal life through the mud. They'll call neighbors and friends to testify about your decline. We can win, but you could lose your peace and your dignity in the process." Her words were like a bucket of cold water. I could win in the courtroom but lose in the court of public opinion in Maple Creek. Stephen was fighting me on two fronts, legal and social. I realized, to win, I had to fight on both of those fronts too. The legal evidence was my sword, but my reputation and the community's trust, that had to be my shield. While Lucy and I were secretly working with the lawyer, the situation at the bakery was getting worse, like a patient slowly fading. Every time I stopped by, the cheerful, bustling atmosphere was gone, replaced by a heartbreaking quiet. The bell on the door rang less often. The pastry trays were still full, well past noon. Emily, my loyal employee, was getting thinner, her eyes always shadowed with worry. One afternoon, when it was just the two of us in the shop, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She put down her cleaning rag and looked at me, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Alice, I have to tell you something." She told me what had been happening on the days I was busy with paperwork. Customers had thinned out dramatically. A few of the regulars had even told her why. They said, Emily hesitated. They said they heard we were being selfish, holding up the town's development project. One person even said that you weren't all there anymore. My heart clenched, but I motioned for her to continue. And the worst part happened last Thursday. Her voice broke. When I was getting the morning sandwich bread ready, I found that someone had deliberately put a wad of greasy, dirty steel wool into the dough. I caught it in time, but we had to throw out the entire batch. We had almost no fresh bread to sell that day. "Mrs. Alice, someone is trying to sabotage us." I stood there, frozen. This wasn't just rumors anymore. This was action. A cowardly and vicious act meant to destroy not just a reputation, but the livelihood of innocent people like Mary and her husband. The anger I felt was no longer a slow burn. It erupted into a fire. Stephen had gone too far. He had attacked his father's legacy, and now he was hurting the good, hard-working people of this town. I looked into Emily's tear-filled eyes, and I knew I couldn't just play defense anymore. I had to fight back. "Don't you worry, Emily," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "This isn't your fault, and it's not going to continue. I promise." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, my history books spread around me like silent old friends. I read about resistance movements, about campaigns that started with the small acts of ordinary people, and I realized Stephen was attacking me with a story by trying to twist the narrative about who I was. Well, I would fight back with history, my real history, and the history of that bakery. The next morning, my kitchen became a command center. I was up at 4 a.m. I felt an energy I hadn't had in years. I decided to launch Operation John's Memorial Apple Pie. I rolled out the dough on my countertop, feeling the cool, soft texture under my palms. My hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with an expert muscle memory that could never be erased. The house filled with a familiar scent, a scent of happiness, of peaceful days. It was an affirmation. I was still here. I was still me. By noon, 5 golden, gleaming apple pies sat on the cooling rack, sending out an irresistible aroma. Each pie was a message. Each pie had a destination. I delivered them, not like an old woman giving gifts, but like a general inspecting her troops. I went to the influential people in town, old friends, former students, the people who could make a difference. I didn't accuse Stephen. I just told the story of the bakery. It's so sad how vicious rumors can harm a small business that's been part of our town for so long, I'd say, and I let the apple pie tell the rest of the story. But my most important move was yet to come. The community feedback meeting for the revitalization project was held at the town hall on Wednesday evening. The hall was packed. The air was tense. Stephen stood at the podium, looking polished and confident, talking about a bright future, about the economic benefits the project would bring. He spoke about the necessity of sacrificing for the greater good. Many of the townspeople, especially the small shop owners from Main Street, sat in silence, their faces etched with worry. But no one dared to speak up. They were paralyzed by his promises and his veiled threats. When the feedback portion began, there was an awkward silence. No one wanted to be the first to stand up against a powerful mayoral candidate. And then I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could see the surprise on Stephen's face, which quickly hardened into a flash of anger. I walked slowly to the microphone in the center aisle. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice was not. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "My name is Alice Waterford. I have lived in Maple Creek for 72 years. I taught history to your children and your grandchildren for 40 years. I paused, letting the words sink in. I believe in progress. History teaches us that societies that do not change are societies that die. The project that Commissioner Stephen has presented is beautiful on paper. I turned to look directly at my son. But history teaches us another, more important lesson. That progress built on the backs of the most vulnerable, progress that tramples on the lives and livelihoods of ordinary families, isn't progress at all. It's conquest. A murmur went through the crowd. Our main street isn't just a collection of old buildings that need replacing, I continued, my voice growing stronger. It is a collection of dreams. Mr. Peterson's store, the Green's Pharmacy, Tom's barbershop, and yes, my late husband's bakery. These are not assets to be liquidated. They are livelihoods. They are the places where dozens of families work hard every single day to feed their children. Asking them to sacrifice for the greater good is no different than asking them to sacrifice their own children's futures. I turned back to the townspeople. We want a Maple Creek that grows, but we want a growth that has a heart, a growth that honors its past and protects the very people who built this town. I am standing here tonight not to defend a bakery. I am here to defend the very soul of Maple Creek. When I finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, from the back, a single person clapped. It was Mr. Peterson. Then Mrs. Miller joined in. And then the entire hall erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a roar of agreement, of release. The silent townspeople had found their voice. I looked up at the podium. Stephen's face was pale. His politician's smile was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, unconcealed fury. For the first time, he had lost control of the narrative. I walked slowly back to my seat, my heart pounding. I hadn't just saved the bakery's reputation. I had accidentally become the spokesperson for the voiceless. My shield wasn't just protecting me anymore. It had become a banner for an entire community. That town hall meeting changed the entire landscape of the battle. I was no longer a lonely old woman trying to protect her home. I had, unintentionally, become the voice of the opposition. My phone at home rang off the hook. Small shop owners, worried citizens they called to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask what they could do to help. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel isolated. An alliance was forming, not in secret, but right out in the open daylight of our town. But this victory came at a price. It turned my quiet, personal war into a public showdown. Stephen could no longer afford to ignore me. He had to put this fire out before it burned his whole campaign to the ground. He came to see me late one afternoon, unannounced. I was in the garden, trimming the deadheads off my roses, when his fancy car pulled up to the curb. He got out, without Brenda. His face wasn't the calm, composed mask of a politician. It was tight with stress and anger. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped without a hint of a greeting. I calmly set down my pruning shears and took off my gardening gloves. "Come inside, Stephen." We sat across from each other in the living room, the late afternoon sun streaming in. The silence between us was heavy and thick. "What the hell are you doing?" he finally began, his voice a furious whisper. "Are you trying to destroy me, after everything I've done for you?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I am just speaking the truth, and I am protecting your father's legacy. What is so wrong with that?" "The truth?" He scoffed, a twisted, ugly smile on his face. "The truth is you're being selfish. You're clinging to a past that doesn't exist anymore, and you're getting in the way of the future of an entire town, of your own son's future. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? The donors are asking questions. My poll numbers are dropping. Maybe they're starting to see the real you," I said quietly. That remark was like a slap. His face turned a deep red. "The real me is someone who is trying to do the right thing for this place, and I will not let anyone, not even you, stand in my way." He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "I came here to tell you one last time. Give it up, Mom. Agree to sell the bakery, publicly endorse my project, and everything will go back to the way it was. And if I don't?" He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes were as cold as ice. Then don't blame me for what comes next. I am running to win, and I will do whatever it takes to win. You are not going to like what happens next. I swear it." The threat wasn't veiled anymore. It was naked and cruel. When he slammed the door on his way out, I knew I was out of time. I had to act, and I had to be decisive. That very evening, I called Lawyer Jenkins. I told her about Stephen's threat. "He's telling the truth, Mrs." Jenkins said, her voice grim. "We can't wait any longer. It's time to hit them where it hurts their resources. Are you ready for the first step, Mrs. Waterford?" "I'm ready," I replied, my voice firm. The next morning, I drove to the bank in the next town over, where I knew no one would recognize me. I felt like a spy in my own life. I sat across from a stranger, a bank teller, presented my identification, and asked to open a new savings account in my name only, Alice Waterford. When the young woman typed my name into the system, she looked up. "Ma'am, it shows you already have a joint account with our Maple Creek branch." "I know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Today I would like to open a personal account, and then I would like to transfer the entire balance from the joint account in Maple Creek into this new one." The teller blinked, a little confused, but my request was perfectly legal. After a few forms were signed, she handed me a crisp, new passbook. I looked at the printed name, just my name, Alice Waterford. It felt like I had just been granted citizenship in my own kingdom. When the transaction was complete, I knew the time bomb had been set. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, on a Friday evening, I was sitting and reading a book when Lucy called, her voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "Grandma, Mom and Dad are at the Gilded Leaf." I overheard Mom on the phone with a friend. They're having a hugely important dinner with some big donors from Boston. The Gilded Leaf, the most expensive, exclusive restaurant in the county, a place where one dinner could cost my entire month's pension. I felt my heart beat a little faster. The fish were swimming toward the trap, and then the fish took the bait. I can picture the scene so vividly, it's as if I were there. Stephen, in his most expensive suit, pontificating about his vision for Maple Creek. Brenda, smiling gracefully beside him, pouring wine for their important guests. The dinner is going perfectly. Everyone is charmed by this image of a successful, powerful couple. At the end of the meal, Stephen confidently waves over the waiter and pulls out the platinum debit card, the one for the joint account. "I'll take the entire check, please," he says, a magnanimous host. The waiter returns a few minutes later, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but your card has been declined." A hush falls over the table. I can just imagine Stephen's face tightening. There must be some mistake. "Run it again." The waiter tries again. "Still nothing, sir. It says insufficient funds." Insufficient funds. Those two words must have exploded in Stephen's mind like a grenade. The embarrassment, the humiliation, in front of the very people he was trying so desperately to impress. I can see the donor's eyes shifting from admiration to suspicion. Brenda probably tried to save the moment with a strained smile, perhaps using her own card, but the damage was done. The perfect picture had a massive crack running right through it. Less than an hour later, a car screeched to a halt in front of my house. The car door slammed like a gunshot. I was waiting. I calmly put my book down and walked to the door, opening it before they could even start pounding. Stephen and Brenda stood there, their faces masks of pure fury. "What did you do?" Stephen hissed, forgoing any greeting. His face was blotchy with anger and shame. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, my voice even. "The card! The money in the account! What did you do with it?" Brenda shrieked, her usual grace gone, replaced by an ugly, shrill panic. "You embarrassed us in front of the most important people. Do you have any idea what you've ruined?" "Oh, I think I do," I said, looking my son directly in the eye. I moved my money into a different account, my own account. Stephen looked stunned, as if I'd just spoken a foreign language. "Your money? That was a joint account. We had a right to that money." "No, you didn't," I said, my voice now as cold and sharp as steel. "That was the life savings of your father and me. It was in an account that I foolishly allowed you to share. And I have every right to move my money wherever I please. This has nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with us?" Brenda let out a harsh, venomous laugh. "We are building a future for this family. You have an obligation to support us. You owe us that." Obligation. Another word used to chain me. I looked at them. these two people standing before me, and I didn't recognize them anymore. Greed and delusion had turned them into strangers. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice a deadly whisper. "I gave you my entire life. That is over now." I didn't wait for a reply. I slowly stepped back and closed the door on their shocked faces. The click of the lock echoed in the quiet house. I could hear them yelling and cursing outside for another moment, then the sound of their car roaring away into the night. I leaned my back against the door, my heart hammering. I had done it. I had faced them. But I knew this was just the beginning. This public humiliation wouldn't stop them. It would only make them more ruthless. And Stephen's threat spurred me to uncover the worst truth of all. With Mrs. Jenkins's help, I filed a formal legal request with the bank, demanding every single record related to my assets for the past 3 years. A few weeks later, a cardboard box full of documents arrived at her office. We spent an entire afternoon going through them. And then, we found it. The first discovery was bad enough. My signature had been forged on a second mortgage application to get cash for the campaign. But as we kept digging, an even more horrifying truth emerged. There was another file, a power of attorney form authorizing a one-time, lump sum withdrawal from my retirement account, the one account I thought was completely safe. The signature on that was a forgery too. They had done it twice. Twice, they had stolen my identity, signed my name to lies, and drained the funds I had spent a lifetime saving. I let the paper fall from my hand. A cold dread crept up my spine. This wasn't a war over property anymore. This wasn't just humiliation or threats. This was a crime, a calculated, silent crime committed by the very son I had brought into this world. And I knew, with this evidence in my hands, I could do more than defend myself. I could destroy them. The only question now was, did I have the courage to do it? The mortgage application and the pension withdrawal form lay on the polished mahogany desk in Mrs. Jenkins's office, looking innocent under the lamplight. But to me, they were twin monsters, born of greed and betrayal. The two forged signatures at the bottom weren't just ink. They were the deepest kind of violation, a theft of something more than money. They had stolen my name, my history, and made it a tool for their own crimes. The hot anger I'd felt after the restaurant incident had cooled, replaced by a frighteningly calm and empty feeling. It was grief, not for myself, but for the son I had raised. The son I had known was truly gone. The man named Stephen, the candidate for mayor, the man who would forge his own mother's signature twice, was a complete stranger. And realizing that, finally and irrevocably, freed me from the last chain of a blind mother's love. I was no longer struggling with the question, how can I do this to my son? The question now was, how can I allow this stranger to continue to ruin my family's legacy and this town's future? I picked up the phone, my fingers no longer trembling. I called Mrs. Jenkins. "Mrs. Jenkins," I said as soon as she answered, my voice preternaturally calm. "I've reviewed the mortgage documents we requested. The signature at the bottom. That is not my signature. I am absolutely certain of it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Mrs. Jenkins spoke, her voice grave. "Are you sure, Alice?" "Positive," I replied. "I've been signing that name for 72 years. I'd know it anywhere, and I've never signed anything like that." "All right," Mrs. Jenkins said. "This is our silver bullet. This changes everything. Forgery is a felony. It carries jail time. I'll have the signature professionally authenticated immediately. But Alice, the question is no longer how do we get your assets back. The question is now, how far are you willing to go?" I looked out my window at the maple trees, blazing in their final red glory before the fall. "I want to stop him," I said, my voice a firm whisper. "I am not looking for revenge, Mrs. Jenkins. I am looking for the truth, and the truth needs to come out before he can poison this entire town." "I understand," she replied. "In that case, it's time we enlisted a little outside help." I knew exactly who she was talking about. The next day, I drove to the offices of the Maple Creek Chronicle. The editor, Mr. Howard, was an old friend of John's and mine. He was an old-school newsman, a believer in the power of the truth, and a story well told. I didn't bring an apple pie this time. This time, I brought a copy of the fraudulent mortgage application. "Alice." Mr. Howard greeted me with a warm smile. Come in, I can still taste that apple pie. I'm not here today as a baker, David, I said, taking the chair opposite his cluttered desk. I'm here as a citizen of Maple Creek, a frightened citizen. I told him everything, not in the voice of a wounded mother, but in the voice of a history teacher presenting the facts. I laid out the bank statements, the articles about the revitalization project, and finally, the copy of the forged mortgage application. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just presented the truth. Mr. Howard listened in silence, his expression growing more and more serious. He picked up the application, put on his glasses, and studied the signature carefully. He didn't speak for a long moment, just staring at the paper. Then he looked up at me. "Alice," he said softly, "I am so sorry. I am truly sorry you've had to go through this." Then, the professional journalist returned to his eyes. "This is a big story. Bigger than just family fraud. This is a story about the character of a man who wants to lead us, but if I print this, it will destroy your son." "I know," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But if you don't print it, he could destroy this town. David, I'm not asking you to write a hit piece on Stephen. I'm asking you to write a story about an issue that is happening silently, right here in Maple Creek. A story about elder financial abuse. Use my story as a case study, anonymously. Let the people draw their own conclusions." Mr. Howard nodded, a deep understanding in his face. "Let me see what I can do." I had planted the seed. Now I just had to wait and see what would grow. And then, on that Friday morning, it blossomed. I went out to the porch to get my paper, just like every other day. The morning air was crisp and cool. I unfolded the Maple Creek Chronicle, and there it was. On the front page, below the fold, an editorial that took up nearly half the page. I didn't have to read it all. Just the headline told me that Stephen's world was about to come crashing down. The headline was in bold, clear type. "The shadow of devotion. Is elder financial abuse happening in Maple Creek?" My heart pounded as I read. The article didn't name a single name. It just told a hypothetical story about a model family in Vermont, a politically ambitious son, an elderly mother who trustingly gave him financial control, unexplained payments to consulting firms, a town revitalization project, and a family asset being pressured for sale. And at the end, the article asked the piercing questions. Do we really know the people who want to lead us? Can filial piety be used as a mask for greed? And what is our responsibility, as a community, to protect our most vulnerable members? It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It accused no one, but it pointed a finger at the only suspect in a crowded room. In the context of the heated mayoral race, amidst the rumors that had already been circulating, anyone in Maple Creek who read that article knew exactly who it was about. The bomb had gone off. That day, when I went to Mr. Peterson's grocery store, the change was palpable. Usually, people would greet me with cheerful hellos. Today, a strange quiet fell over the store when I walked in. People looked at me, then quickly looked away. It wasn't shunning. It was awkwardness, sympathy, a respectful and sad deference. They didn't know what to say. When I got to the checkout counter, Mr. Peterson met my eyes, and his gaze told me everything I needed to know. He said nothing about the article. He just gave my hand a gentle squeeze as he handed me my change. "It takes a lot of courage," he said softly, "to turn on a light in a dark room, Alice." My phone started ringing. Old friends. "Alice, I just read the paper. I just wanted to say, I'm with you. Alice, if you need anything at all." They didn't ask for details. They didn't have to. They knew. My community shield was now forged in steel. The call I was waiting for finally came late that afternoon. The caller ID said, "Stephen." I took a deep, steadying breath and answered. Silence. Then the sound of an angry, ragged breath. "Mother," he hissed, his voice no longer that of a calm politician. It was the snarl of a cornered animal. "What have you done? You've ruined me. You've ruined everything." A strange calm washed over me. "Are you talking about the newspaper article, Stephen?" "Don't play innocent with me," he screamed, his voice cracking. "The whole town is looking at me. My donors are calling. How could you do this to your own son?" This was it, the moment of truth. "You ask how I could do this?" I said, my voice cold and clear without a tremor. "Let me ask you a question in return, Stephen. How could you forge my name?" Absolute silence on the other end of the line, a stunned, dead silence. I hadn't just answered his question, I had ended the argument. I had spoken the one undeniable truth that only the two of us knew. I didn't wait for him to reply. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting the connection. The room was quiet. After that phone call, a strange stillness settled over my house. It was no longer the empty silence of loneliness, but the heavy calm at the eye of a hurricane when you know the destructive winds are raging just outside. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt an endless fatigue, like a soldier after a long battle. I had fired my last shot. Now all that was left was to wait and watch the enemy's fortress crumble. I didn't have to wait long. The collapse wasn't a loud explosion. It was like a crack spreading across ice, starting from a single point of weakness, then racing outwards until the entire structure shatters. The first crack appeared on Saturday morning. Lucy called me, her voice a mixture of anxiety and grim satisfaction. "Grandma, Mr. Henderson, the bank president, just publicly withdrew his personal endorsement of Dad's campaign. He just said it was due to irreconcilable differences in principle." James Henderson, my old student. My apple pie had done more than just stir up a memory. It had reminded him of the lessons on integrity I had taught him. The withdrawal of such a respected figure from the town's financial community was a major blow. It was a signal to everyone else. This ship is sinking. By the afternoon, the crack had become a chasm. The donors from Boston, the ones who had witnessed Stephen's humiliation at the restaurant, issued a formal statement, pulling all of their funding. Their stated reason was polite, a restructuring of investment strategy. But all of Maple Creek understood. No one wanted to be associated with a potential scandal, especially one involving the abuse of an elderly mother. I pictured the scene inside Stephen and Brenda's house, the panic, the recriminations. Their perfect family portrait must be in tatters. I felt no joy, only a deep sadness for my granddaughter Lucy, who was having to watch this collapse from afar. The final, inevitable implosion came on Sunday night. It was a breaking news alert on the local TV channel. I was sitting in my living room knitting a scarf when Stephen's familiar face appeared on the screen, but it wasn't the confident, beaming face from the campaign posters. It was the face of a defeated man. He was pale and gaunt. Brenda stood beside him, attempting a brave smile, but her eyes were empty. Stephen stood before a few microphones, reading a prepared statement from a piece of paper. His voice was flat, robotic. "After careful consideration and due to an unforeseen family health matter that requires my full attention," he said, and I almost laughed at the bitter irony of those words, "I am officially withdrawing my candidacy for the office of Mayor of Maple Creek." This was a difficult decision, but family must always come first. Family. He still dared to use that word. He had used it as his reason to begin, and now he was using it as his excuse to end. The camera panned over the small crowd of reporters, then lingered on a few townspeople who had gathered to watch. I saw Mr. Peterson's face and Mrs. Miller's. They didn't look triumphant. They just looked sad. A collective town, sadness for one of their own who had fallen so far. When the broadcast cut to other news, I turned off the television. The room fell silent. It was done. The public battle was over, but I knew the personal war had one final chapter. The chapter of surrender. On Tuesday morning, Mrs. Jenkins called. "They're ready, Alice. Their lawyer just contacted me. They want to meet to settle things quietly." "What do they want?" I asked. "They want a deal. They will give back everything in exchange for your silence. Specifically, that you will never mention the forged signatures to anyone, especially not the district attorney's office." This was it, the final decision. Did I want revenge? Did I want to see my son face criminal justice? I thought of Lucy. I thought of the shame she would carry if her father became a convicted felon. "I don't want him in jail," I said softly to Mrs. Jenkins. "I just want my life back. I want them out of it." "I understand," she replied. "Then I will arrange a meeting in my office for tomorrow. This will not be a negotiation, Alice. This will be a signing. The terms are already set." The next day, as I drove to Burlington, I felt light for the first time in weeks. When I walked into the law firm's plush conference room, they were already there, Stephen and Brenda. They sat on the far side of the long mahogany table, looking small and pathetic. Stephen had lost weight. His eyes were ringed with dark circles. Brenda, always so perfectly put together, looked haggard, her makeup unable to hide her exhaustion. They wouldn't look at me. Mrs. Jenkins sat at the head of the table, calm and in command. Beside her was a neat stack of documents. "Good morning," she began, her voice echoing in the too quiet room. "We are here today to finalize some paperwork. Let me be clear, this is not a discussion. The terms are set and are non-negotiable. Mrs. Waterford has agreed not to pursue criminal charges, in exchange for which you will sign every document on this table." She began to slide the folders across to them, one by one, like the final nails in the coffin of their ambition. First, the full and immediate revocation of all powers of attorney. Brenda snorted, a weak, contemptuous sound. "Pointless. It's all over anyway." Mrs. Jenkins' expression didn't change. Second, documents relinquishing all rights and removing your names from all joint bank accounts, investment funds, and insurance policies held with Mrs. Waterford. Third, the quitclaim deed, removing your names from the co-ownership of the house at 12 Oak Street, returning full and sole ownership to Mrs. Waterford. At this, Brenda couldn't stay silent. "This is a humiliation," she hissed, her voice cracking with fury. "We put so much work into that house. Stephen repainted the kitchen himself. We installed the new dishwasher, which was paid for with Mrs. Waterford's money," Mrs. Jenkins replied coolly, giving her no ground. She continued in a monotone. "Fourth, a restitution agreement, requiring you to repay the full amount of funds documented as spent for personal and political use from Mrs. Waterford's accounts. A payment schedule is attached." "Restitution?" Stephen, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and rage. "Do you have any idea what this has cost me? My political career is finished. The whole town is whispering behind my back. We're a joke. And now you want money too?" "That wasn't your money, Mr. Waterford," Mrs. Jenkins said, speaking for me. "It was your mother's money, money that you took without her permission." "We were just managing it," Stephen shot back, his voice full of a desperate self-justification, as if he were trying to convince himself. "We were acting in the best interests of the whole family. She couldn't do those things on her own. We were helping her." That word, helping, was like a switch, flipping on all the pain and righteous anger I had been holding back. I lifted my head and looked directly at my son, and for the first time, I let him see the ruin he had caused. "Helping me?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the silence of the room, cutting through all his excuses. "Were you really, Stephen?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Do you call adding your name to my accounts when I was at my weakest helping? Do you call convincing me to sign papers I completely trusted you with while hiding your real intentions helping?" I saw the color drain from his face, his false confidence beginning to crack. And then, "Do you call signing my name for me when I wasn't even there?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, but every word landed like a hammer blow. "Is that helping?" A profound silence fell over the room. Stephen stared, his mouth slightly open, but no words came out. He knew that I knew everything. "My entire life," I continued, my voice trembling with emotion, not weakness. "I worked, I sacrificed, not to have a lot of money, but to build one single thing: trust. I trusted you, Stephen, completely, blindly. I gave you the most precious thing I had." Tears welled in my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. "And you, with your greed, you took that trust and you threw it away like garbage. All of my sacrifice, all of my love, you turned it into nothing, all for nothing." I took a deep, steadying breath. "So don't you talk to me about what you've lost. Don't talk to me about a failed campaign or town gossip. Everything that is happening here today. It is not a punishment. It is simply a consequence. The consequence you have earned for the choices you made." I finished and looked away, refusing to see his broken face any longer. For me, the conversation was over, permanently. "Mrs. Jenkins," I said, my voice returning to a cool calm, "please continue." And finally, Mrs. Jenkins cut him off, her voice now sharp as a razor. "Is a non-contact and non-disclosure agreement. You will not contact Mrs. Waterford in any form, except through my office. You will also not discuss, allude to, or publicly mention the events that have transpired." A violation of any of these terms will result in all of the evidence we have, including the 2 authenticated forgeries, being turned over immediately to the district attorney's office. The trap had sprung. The mention of the forgeries extinguished any last spark of defiance they might have had. Silence reigned. Stephen stared down at the polished surface of the table. Brenda bit her lip, her eyes red. There was no arrogance left, no defiance, only the hollow emptiness of defeat. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man, quietly pushed a pen toward them. "Sign it," he said softly. "There's no other choice." Brenda took the pen first, her hand trembling. She signed her name on each page, her script a jagged, angry scrawl, as if she wanted to tear the paper. Each signature was an admission of defeat. Then it was Stephen's turn. He picked up the pen but didn't sign right away. He lifted his head, and for the first time during the entire meeting, he looked at me. His eyes, the eyes of the boy I had loved so much, were now filled with a complex mixture of resentment, shame, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of remorse. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then he closed it. Some things, once broken, can never be fixed with words. He lowered his head and signed his name, mechanically, soullessly. When the last signature was down, a strange feeling washed over me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just an ending. A chapter of my life, a chapter full of pain and struggle, was finally closed. Mrs. Jenkins gathered the documents. "This meeting is concluded," she said. I stood up, without a backward glance. I walked out of the room, leaving them there with the wreckage of their ambition and their lies. As I stepped out into the crisp Burlington air, I took a deep breath. It had never tasted so clean. The drive from Burlington back to Maple Creek that day seemed shorter than usual. The autumn leaves were still brilliant along the roadside, but for the first time in months, I truly saw them. I saw the gold of the birch trees shimmering in the sun, the deep red of the maples like little flames. The world had come alive again, as if a gray film had just been pulled away from my eyes. When I got home, the house greeted me with a different kind of silence. It was the silence of peace, of sovereignty. I walked into the kitchen, where it had all begun, and set my keys on the table. The small clink of metal on wood sounded like a declaration. I was home, truly home. The days that followed passed in an almost sacred quiet. No more calculating phone calls, no more sweet-sounding lies. Just the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the living room, the sound of birds in the garden, the happy whistle of the tea kettle each morning. I realized that freedom wasn't something loud or grand. Freedom, for me now, was the peace of an uninterrupted, ordinary day. Stephen and Brenda kept their end of the bargain. A few weeks after the signing, I saw a moving truck parked in front of their house across town. They left quietly, without a single goodbye. The house was sold to a young family moving from the city. Maple Creek went on, and the story of Stephen's failed campaign quickly became a piece of local history, a cautionary tale whispered over coffee. I learned what happened to them not because I went looking for it. The news found its way to me, reluctantly, through infrequent, hesitant phone calls from Lucy. She kept in touch with her parents, not out of desire, but from a thin thread of duty. She never went into detail, but from the scattered pieces, from the long pauses in our calls, I could put together the whole picture. They had moved to a big city, a place chaotic enough to swallow their story, to let them become anonymous. But anonymity did not bring them peace. Their alliance, built on shared ambition, could not survive shared failure. With no common goal to strive for, they were left with only blame and bitterness to feed on. Lucy told me, her voice sad, that they divorced less than a year after they left. Brenda, ever the pragmatist, was quick to cut her ties to a failed man. She went back to real estate, trying to rebuild her life in a cutthroat world where no one cared about your past as long as you could turn a profit. And Stephen. His was a quieter tragedy. The glow of the promising politician was gone. In the big city, he was just a middle-aged man with a broken resume. He found a job in sales, a soulless job that required the kind of plastic smile and charm he used to be so good at. But the smile had no power anymore. He wasn't the sun anymore. He was a shadow, a man haunted by his own past. Lucy said that whenever she spoke to her father, all she heard was weariness and a regret that was never spoken aloud. Hearing these things, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for a life that could have been so different, for a family that had been consumed by its own ambition. There are stories in history with no victors, only survivors. And I realized, in my own story, I had chosen to be a survivor, while they had chosen to become ghosts of what they'd lost. Now, as I sit in my kitchen on a winter morning, watching the first snowflakes drift gently past the window, I often reflect on all that has happened. This silence is different. It's no longer the heavy silence of fear or loneliness. It is the stillness, the deep peace of a soul that has passed through the storm and found itself again. I realize now that for most of my life, I had lived in a different kind of silence, the silence of endurance. I was silent when I was tired, silent in the face of unfairness, silent because I thought that was the nature of love, of being a wife and a mother. But this battle taught me about another, more powerful kind of silence, the silence of observation, of gathering facts, of planning. When they mistook my silence for submission, that was the moment they lost the war. They had used a word to try and chain me, grateful. They wanted me to be grateful for being looked after, grateful for being stripped of my own agency. But I understand what true gratitude is now. It's not a debt to be paid. It's in the warmth of this teacup in my hands, in the sound of Lucy's laughter as she tells a funny story, in the sweet memory of John's love every time I look out at the garden. Gratitude isn't submission. It is the appreciation of what is truly valuable, the things that no amount of money can ever buy. My walks through Maple Creek feel different now, too. I often stroll down Main Street, the street that became our unwilling battlefield. I'll pause in front of John's hearth. The atmosphere inside is even more bustling than before. The door is constantly opening and closing, the little bell jingling non-stop. Mary, a bright smile on her face, waves to me through the big glass window. After the scandal, it was as if the whole town rallied to protect the bakery, as if it were a symbol of their own resilience. Business didn't just recover, it soared. It wasn't just a place to buy bread anymore, it had become a destination, a story. And it wasn't just the bakery. I see Mr. Peterson arranging shiny red apples in front of his grocery, and he looks up and gives me a nod of quiet respect. I walk past the Greens Pharmacy, past Tom's barbershop. Each of them had faced the fear of being erased by a slick, soulless project. Now, they were still here, the lights in their shops still on, still serving their neighbors. We had faced a storm together, and I realized the roots of this small community had only grown deeper because of it. I used to think my legacy was this house, the bakery, the savings I had carefully put away. But I was wrong. A true legacy isn't the brick-and-mortar buildings, but the life that fills them. It's the network of families and dreams and hard-working people on this street. In standing up for John's Bakery, I hadn't just protected my own memories, I had helped protect their futures. That's why I started the Alice Legacy Project at the community center. It's not some grand charity. It's just a way to turn my story into a small lamp so that others who might be walking in the same darkness I was can see a way out. It's there to help Mr. Peterson when he needs a new lease reviewed, or to advise the Greens if they face pressure from a big chain pharmacy. It's a reminder that none of us has to be alone. At the launch, I stood before my friends and neighbors and I told them, a legacy isn't what's carved on a gravestone after we're gone. A legacy is the courageous acts we take while we're still living. It's speaking up when others are silent. It's defending the truth when lies are all around. And most importantly, a legacy is reminding each other that no one, at any age, deserves to have the right to write their own story taken away from them. My life is simple now. I read my books, I tend my garden, I have tea with my friends. I watch Lucy grow into a magnificent young woman. This house is no longer a battlefield or a prison. It is simply, and finally, a home. Sometimes, when I walk past the old bakery, I smile. I don't just see John's legacy in the warm bread. I see the legacy of a whole street that refused to be erased, of a community that found its voice, and that, perhaps, is the last and most beautiful history lesson I have to offer. The seasons turned in Maple Creek, as they always do. My garden, after a long winter sleeping beneath a blanket of snow, stirred again in the spring and burst into glorious color in the summer. Peace wasn't a static state, I realized, but a rhythm. It was the rhythm of planting and harvesting, of living in tune with the natural world without being thrown off course by the machinations of men. My truest joy, though, came on Sundays. That's when Lucy would drive home from the university. She would walk into the kitchen, bringing with her the fresh air of youth and a bag of laundry. We would bake together, not for business, but for the simple pleasure of feeling the soft dough beneath our hands. She would tell me about her law classes, about the cases she was studying, her eyes shining with an idealism for justice. In those moments, I saw that my legacy was not just protected, it was being passed on into strong hands and a good heart. Sometimes, over a slice of pie, she would speak of her father, nothing dramatic, just small, sad snapshots. He'd changed jobs again. He'd called her on her birthday, his voice sounding tired. I would listen, without judgment, like a historian documenting a past event. The sharp edges of the pain had dulled, leaving only the sad truth of a life gone astray. Then one afternoon, as we were washing dishes together, the late sun slanting through the window, Lucy asked, her voice very quiet, "Grandma?" she said. "Do you ever miss him? Do you think about Dad?" I stopped drying the plate in my hand. I looked out the window at the old apple tree his father had planted. The silence settled between us, broken only by the drip of water in the sink. How do you explain to your granddaughter that her father exists in your heart like a phantom limb? A part of you that was amputated to save the rest, but on cold nights, you can still feel it ache with a memory of what it used to be. A mother's love doesn't vanish, it just changes form. It becomes a quiet sorrow, a reminder that even in the most carefully tended gardens, some seeds can grow wrong. I turned back to her and managed a small, sad smile. "I think about the boy he was, my dear," I said. "I will always remember the little boy who loved the smell of baking bread." And that was the truth. I had chosen to preserve the memory of my son, the little boy, a memory untarnished by the ambition and deceit of the man he became. It was how I held on to the love, without sacrificing the peace I had fought so hard to win.